What's on your radar, Batya?
Well, a week after the midterm elections that shocked the nation, it's only becoming clearer just how badly the media messed this one up. Americans were promised a red tsunami. Instead, President Biden had the best midterm elections of a sitting president in 20 years, and this despite his dreadful approval ratings. Every election that's been called since Tuesday has favored the Democrats, who have held the Senate and may even keep the House. To explain away the refusal of the electorate to obey the diktat of media prognosticators, a few narratives have taken hold. Some have argued that the Democrats' success is proof of how important abortion is to the American electorate. For others, the election was a referendum on Trump, proximity to the former president being one of the best predictors of whether a Republican candidate tanked. Still, others have seen in the results proof that candidate choice matters. You can't just run a stop the steal kook or an out-of-state TV doctor and expect voters to turn out because he's running on the Republican ticket. There's a bit of truth to all of these answers, but to me they all miss a larger, more important point. Tuesday's results were less a loss for Republicans or a win for Democrats than they were a victory for depolarization. Americans showing up to the polls didn't vote for Democrats or against Republicans as much as they voted for shrinking the growing gap separating them. Call it the normie election. People who decided Tuesday's results were everyday Americans sick of the overheated political atmosphere that's bleeding out into everyday life. People who don't spend all day on Twitter or watching cable news or YouTube shows, who are sick of Facebook fights and Thanksgiving family brawls and just want a return to normal, to the good old days when you could just debate things cordially. By and large, voters rewarded moderation last Tuesday. Democrats, for example, performed better in close races than in safe seats, outperforming expectations in districts rated as toss-up or lean Democrat, and underperforming in districts rated as solid or safe, as David Shore pointed out. And as Josh Kraushaar points out, voters who told posters they somewhat disapprove of Biden backed, quote, normie Republicans while rejecting the MAGA candidates. They went for Brian Kemp over Stacey Abrams, but rejected Herschel Walker, for example, by the same margin. In race after race, voters rewarded candidates who represented the most reasonable version of their ticket. They went for candidates who they could picture, or who perhaps they had even seen, talking to someone that they themselves or even the candidate disagreed with. Consider Republican Mike Lawler's victory in New York's 17th district. Lawler ousted no less a figure than the head of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, Representative Sean Patrick Maloney. Of course, Lawler had help. He had $6 million from a Republican super PAC and some helpful redistricting. But Lawler also ran a moderate campaign that was pitched at appealing to both the blue-collar cops, firefighters, and veterans in his district, as well as wealthy liberals in Rockland County and Chappaqua. Lawler, a son of Rockland, ran on crime, the economy, and the border, issues that unite working-class Americans across party lines. And crucially, he distanced himself from the Stop the Steal movement, making it clear he believes Joe Biden won the 2020 election. When asked about how he managed to pull off his victory, Lawler spoke about Democrats. Take a look.
My district has 70,000 more Democrats than Republicans. So I wouldn't have won it without the support of many Democrats and independents. I think people are excited about the opportunity and really looking for change. And, this district is home to Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton, George Soros. So it's a very diverse district.
So you're Hillary Clinton's congressman.
I am now Hillary Clinton's congressman.
and George Soros' congressman.
I look forward to hearing from them. In order to win this district, I needed to go everywhere and talk to everyone. And I can't be afraid because maybe there's some tough questions that come.
Lawler's was a victory for a man who made clear he was not going to be a tailwind for the most extreme forces in his party, who was unashamed of the fact that he was working to convince Democrats that he could represent them too. Indeed, he was proud of it. In a similar vein, both Representative Alyssa Slotkin and Representative Abigail Spanberger won their elections in Michigan's 7th and Virginia's 7th districts, respectively. The two are both Blue Dog Dems, proud moderates with backgrounds in the CIA, who won in 2018 as Democrats in red districts. Both Spanberger and Slotkin stand proudly for an independence of spirit, making a habit of taking on their own party, publicly rebuking progressives for extremism when warranted. Tonight, voters here made clear that the politics of division are not what they want for our families or our state, Slotkin wrote on Twitter in announcing that her challenger, Tom Barrett, had called to concede. Contrast that with Charlie Crist, the man who lost Florida to Governor Ron DeSantis in a humiliating double-digit defeat, who bragged to a reporter during the campaign that he didn't want Republicans to vote for him. Watch.
If you have that hate in your heart, keep it there.
It's quite the campaign strategy to suggest that anyone you haven't convinced to vote for you should just keep it that way. No wonder Crist lost so significantly. Floridians took his advice. But I suspect DeSantis' double-digit victory was fueled not just by Republicans, but by a lot of people who still identify as Democrats. It was something DeSantis made a point of noting in his acceptance speech.
Thank you to Miami-Dade County. Thank you to Palm Beach County. Now, we're still tallying the votes, but it's clearly apparent that this election, we will have garnered a significant number of votes from people who may not have voted for me 4 years ago. And I just want to let you know, I am honored to have earned your trust and your support over these 4 years.
DeSantis also explicitly thanked Miami-Dade County, a heavily Hispanic area that was once considered a Democratic stronghold. And he didn't just win Cubans either, who have always leaned conservative. DeSantis grew his share of the Puerto Rican vote by 20 points, from 34% in 2018 to 55% on Tuesday. How did he do it? Despite what the Democrats want us to believe, DeSantis is no right-wing extremist. He cruised to victory thanks to a record of governing Florida for the past 4 years as a populist, appealing to the middle and working class irrespective of their party affiliation. DeSantis has figured out something that's lost on most politicians, that there are a lot of Americans who are culturally conservative and fiscally protectionist in both parties, who no one is speaking to. These voters are united on issues like COVID-19 lockdowns, sexualized messaging in early childhood education, and immigration. And on each of these issues, DeSantis took a big swing that signaled his willingness to represent this forgotten constituency and give them a voice. In other words, he took Trump's central insight that the white working class has been abandoned by an elitist, leftist cultural hegemony that looks down on working Americans, and he expanded it to include working class Hispanics and working class liberals. To a smaller degree, I think the depolarizing normie midterms explains another poorly prognosticated race. Moderation may not be the first word that comes to mind when thinking of John Fetterman, who won his Pennsylvania contest for Senate against Mehmet Oz. But Fetterman won despite suffering a debilitating stroke during the campaign, thanks to what Al Weaver aptly called a go-anywhere strategy that focused on competing in rural counties across the state and holding the party line in the cities and suburbs. And he did it all in shorts, a hoodie, and visible tattoos, actively reversing the damage that Hillary Clinton had done to her party by spurning these very same rural white working class areas in 2016. Far from diminishing his appeal, I think the stroke that Fetterman suffered made him seem even more like the everyman he dresses as, bald, overweight, and now sometimes verbally impaired. He's someone that voters can never imagine looking down on them. Unlike the millionaire with "I don't even know how many houses I own," lecturing them about what to eat on television. He may come from privilege, but everything about him is a rebuke of elitism, including his stroke, and I think that voters rewarded him for his humility with their loyalty. Even abortion was less a win for Democrats than it was for the kind of libertarian, don't tread on me undercurrent of American life that knows no party. As Richard Hanania pointed out, the issue of abortion outperformed the Democrats who ran on it by a wide margin wherever it was on the ballot. In Michigan, an amendment to put the right to an abortion in the state's constitution passed with 2 more points than Democratic Governor Gretchen Whitmer won by. In California, a similar amendment passed 7 points ahead of Gavin Newsom. In Vermont, it was between 6 and 15 points ahead of the Democrats running. In Kentucky, a pro-life ballot failed on a day that voters handed Rand Paul a 20 23-point victory. And in Montana, an anti-abortion measure looks like it will fail, with the same electorate that gave one of its Republican candidates a 35-point margin of victory. In other words, many Americans who did not vote for Democrats voted to keep abortion legal. Like the ticket splitting that happened in a number of other races, this speaks well for a return to a less polarized society that chooses issues and candidates with more flexibility and open-mindedness than we have been told to expect. At the end of the day, the biggest loser of Tuesday's midterms wasn't Trump or the Republicans, so much as it was polarization itself, the division of America into two irreconcilable parties with competing sets of values that never shall meet. The biggest loser was the "I don't want your vote" faction of the political class. That's why the media missed it, because we are agents of polarization. The truth about our nation is often invisible to us because our entire business model is based on making people hate each other. Here's hoping this will be a wake-up call for the people charged with writing the first draft of American history. We should do a better job reflecting the decency of our subject going forward.
Yes, words to live by, Batya, and it is something, we have to grapple with, that the mainstream media, despite their professed fear of and hatred of Donald Trump, don't actually want him to go away from a business model standpoint. Being against Trump helped keep many media outlets alive, even as we're pivoting away from some of what establishment media represented. And so they're going to have terrible incentives if Ron DeSantis proves to be a formidable challenger to Trump, as I expect he will. They probably would prefer anyone to Trump in terms of who actually gets to be the president, but they're not the Trump headlines, which help him because they keep him in, because it reinforces it. By keeping him in the headlines, by criticizing him all the time, they make Republicans want to rally around him and give him better chances of holding on to power, which serves the business interests of the corporate mainstream media.
Right, 100%. And I think, the American people were trying to tell the media and the pollsters we're voting on the issues, right? And what we heard was we're voting for Republicans, right? Because it's so hard for us to imagine that Americans, average Americans, normie Americans, working and middle class Americans, they just are sick of both parties and they don't think about themselves in that way anymore as political.
Well, as we're sitting here discussing things, we have some breaking news from NBC News projecting that Republicans will indeed control the House. After all, with 219 seats, Democrats holding 216 seats. By the thinnest of margins, Republicans will be able to elect the next Speaker of the House, unless they have too much internal dissent on that. We will see. Thank you so much, Batya. We'll have more Rising in just a minute.